for us. I didn't even see that. I apologize. Let me get back over here. Zach, I am so sorry. I did not see you waiting for me. I hope you're doing well.
No, yeah, sorry. I ducked out and back in. I was having some not sure what was going on. I was having some volume issues, so figured it'd be easier to just restart.
Perfect. Yeah, I had that happen to me every day in my life. It seems like. Already been a busy morning talking with Todd Leary about the weekend recruiting. Of course, you win some, you lose some. Indiana gets a great recruit in Trent Sisley that checks a lot of boxes as far as an in-state kid. He's a 3 or 4 year kid. He is a multi-dimensional player that can fill different roles. He is the type of player that Indiana fans are really going to be drawn to. So that's going to cover a lot of that. And he's going to be productive. I think he's a guy that's going to be productive. Now, I don't know how much would be expected of him in his freshman year, but he is going to be someone that contributes as he goes through his career at Indiana.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly what you hope if you're IU. And as you said, I think he's, I think a lot of people project him as more of a 3 or 4 year player rather than somebody that maybe comes in and clicks right away. I think I'm intrigued. I'm always intrigued by guys, and I don't know if this sounds, like a weird one or not. I'm always intrigued by guys that are ranked early in their careers and really seem to live up to it. And I know he's ranked a little higher. I think he was ranked in like the 30s early in his career. Now he's more of kind of a 70s, 80s player. But the point is he's had to spend the last 2-3 years running around with a target on his back. He was highly thought of as a very young player, obviously very successful leading scorer in Heritage Hill's history, even though he left Vermont Verde after 3 seasons. And you and I both have been around recruiting long enough to know when kids like that go to AAU tournaments, other kids try to prove themselves against them and things like that. And it's never really seemed to slow him down. It's never seemed to sort of like, I don't know if the word is overcome him, or I'm not sure, it's never seemed to kind of weigh on him like baggage. And I think that's important. I think it says something about a kid's, frankly, just kind of his character, his ability to handle kind of some of that stuff. I think, obviously, when you talk about his game, you're going to want to see his 3-point shot keep coming along. It's there. You want it to be able to translate to the next level. And then when you talk about the other end of the floor, I think the intriguing thing for Sisley, and I think one of the things that's probably worth paying, fairly close attention to when he's playing an elite schedule at Montverde, is his ability to defend multiple positions. Because, I think about him and I'm not, this isn't necessarily sort of an exact player comparison, but when I watch his film, when I hear people talk about him, I think a little bit about Christian Watford. And obviously Watford's career isn't perfectly linear because Indiana had to ask him to do some stuff, kind of early in his career that was, maybe playing the post more, maybe start as kind of more of a hybrid 4-5 type, which isn't obviously really what Watford, is that was never going to be his long-term position. That was just kind of where Indiana was from a positional perspective at that time. But a player that as he sort of matures can guard multiple positions, can potentially become the kind of player that maybe is a little bit more of a wing at times, but isn't afraid to take smaller defenders down into the post. And the other thing, and you talked about, maybe him being projected as more of a 3 or 4 year guy. I think the other thing too is even in the portal era, you're always going to want those players. You're always going to want, guys that are kind of anchoring presences in your locker room. We've seen the value of a Trey Galloway, of a Race Thompson, I think sometimes we don't assign this kind of value to a star player, but a Trace Jackson Davis, and Anthony Leal. those players do a lot for you, you know, and even in an era, maybe even more so in an era when you are switching out your roster pieces constantly. You've got guys leaving for the pros. You got portal. There's, you're looking at, I think anymore, even the Big Ten programs for the most part are probably looking at least 4 or 5 roster spots turning over a year at least. When you're looking at when that's what you're kind of talking about, it feels really relevant, even, really to me, even more relevant, frankly, to have the kinds of players that, again, provide sort of that anchoring presence in your locker room. And I think, what you hope if you're Indiana is that Trent Sisley turns out to be one of those players.
Absolutely. And Jalen Harrelson, I mean, not getting him is not really a big surprise. Indiana is kind of currently stocked in the guard position. I know that's going to change after this season, but we don't know how that will change. And the guys that are expected to be a major part of that might still be here, although Kenan Carlisle is mentioned in some NBA mock drafts, which is a little surprising. But you're also going to have the potential of having Braylon Mullins here. I don't know if daggone it, Jalen is just going to if he just wants to play point guard, and that is his goal to be a point guard, to head in that direction and try to get to the next level. And I know that he wants to be a one and done, which I know a lot of people want to be a one and done, but he has the physical tools to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I also just think, like you said, you're not going to win every one. And I do wonder, if in his most honest moments, Mike Woodson might look at this one and feel a little bit more like, this was maybe one that he really wanted, because obviously Indiana offered Jalen Harrelson, I think, basically about as early as anybody. And, you always want, the ones you invest in the most are the ones that ultimately are probably going to be the toughest to lose, or the toughest to kind of give up on, so to speak. But at the same time, I think more than ever before, and I don't know exactly, I'm not comfortable, at least I'm not yet comfortable sort of declaring, what I think is the best method of roster building in the portal era and the NIL era. And obviously we're about to shake all that up again when we get revenue sharing. So, we'll kind of see where all this settles out. I think we're going to need at least 4 or 5 years of kind of data that we can sort through and sift through and say this works and this doesn't, and so forth.
Go ahead.
No, but I was just going to say I'm not saying you shouldn't recruit high school players. I still do think, as I said, you number one, you're going to want guys from your own state. Number two, you're going to want players that, as I said, kind of underpin, some of what you're trying to do from sort of a chemistry perspective and a roster perspective and those sorts of things. Number three, there will always be an extent to which you need to recognize there are just talented players in high school, and maybe there are more proven players in the portal, but there are still guys that can help you in high school. But I just don't know if we know yet what is the best formula, so to speak, for essentially just like, when is it time to really hammer on a high school class and say, we got to get 2, 3 guys, 4 guys out of this class? It's got to happen. And when is it time to just sort of say, okay, but we've got we got strong NIL resources. We've got the portal we can lean on. That's kind of our priority, so to speak. Because I think about last year when Indiana put so much effort into that 2024 class and in the end came up with nothing. And then it just took all of those resources into the portal and built what looks like one of the more talented rosters in the Big Ten. So my point is, I understand anybody who's going to get frustrated at losing a recruit. I understand anybody who's going to get frustrated at losing an in-state recruit. I know that's important to IU fans, and I understand why. But there is, for the first time, there is kind of a different there's a different solution if you need one, if you understand what I'm saying. And
Absolutely. It's become so much less important as far as actually getting the production of what you want to see. And I actually responded to someone yesterday and said, I understand how important it is for Indiana fans to see Indiana kids. And I get it. It makes sense. You want that to a degree. But the days of having half your roster from Indiana, that's over. And it should be over. Or you just need to decide as a fan, do you want a team that is winning, competing for Big Ten and national championships, or do you want an Indiana All-Star team? It's that simple, because you can't have both. You have to have an elite team to compete at the elite level. In my meager research, and it just goes back the last 6 years, Zach, no team that's won the national championship has had less than 4 NBA draft picks on the roster of the team that won the title. And that's where it's gone. You've got to have that level of talent to win, because there's always going to be at least 1 or 2 teams like UConn in the last 2 years who not only had that, but replaced it when they lost it. So you have to have some elite talent if you're going to be elite.
You do. And I mean, listen, I poked through something, and I forget exactly what the numbers were, but I poked through something around basically Indiana's last of Indiana's, like, I think I want to say it was of all the 1,000-point scorers Indiana had since the turn of the century, more than half of them have been out-of-state recruits. And that's not to say there aren't good players in the state. And that's not to say there haven't been good players in the state that Indiana missed on, whether they recruited them or not, whether they were priorities for whatever staff was in place at that time, or they weren't, whether they were highly rated recruits or they weren't, whatever. That's not to say there aren't guys that could have helped Indiana that Indiana missed on within the state. I just, I think that this idea that sort of, especially in the portal era, when those guys can move around more easily if they want to, the idea that all of this can just kind of be done with, just kids from Indiana or just kids from the Big Ten footprint, or maybe let's say the traditional Big Ten footprint, because obviously things have changed up there. But the idea that any team can build purely off in-state players or no transfers. I mean, geez, even look at Purdue. Purdue has gotten tons of credit, and rightly so, for the way that it's recruited the state of Indiana in recent years. And Purdue's had some great contributors. I fully expect Braden Smith to be Big Ten preseason player of the year when all those things are announced next week around media days. But Zach Edey's from Canada. Carson Edwards is from Texas. Lance Jones was a transfer that Matt Painter would tell you made an enormous difference for the Boilermakers last season. So it's, even a program that I think a lot of Indiana fans point to at times when Indiana's struggling in recruiting and says, well, they can do it. What, how can we take a lesson from them? It's not exclusive. Matt Painter is still willing to go where the talent is that he knows he needs. And, it's just kind of generally speaking, like, it's never going to be an absolute situation, if you understand what I'm saying.
Absolutely. But Zach, I appreciate you as always, my friend. I will see you tomorrow at a soggy Memorial Stadium.
I do suspect it will be very soggy.
Absolutely. Have a great day, and I hope all things are going well, buddy. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, as always.
You bet. Zach Osterman from the Indy Star, the insider for the Indy Star on the Indiana Beat. Up next, the return of Jeffrey